Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we are going to cover episodes 816 through 818. I don't know why I paused there, which will cover manga chapters 850 and 851. And yeah, we're only getting 2 chapters covering or spanning 3 episodes, so there's surprisingly a lot to actually still talk about despite the lack of content. But yeah, in this trio of episodes, when everything looks dire, we may be approaching a turning point. Alright, so synopsis. Chopper and Carrot have beat and captured Brule and begin to utilize her powers to search for the others, while Brook and Pedro have their own separate battles to retrieve the road poneglyph against Big Mom herself and Baron Tamago respectively. And Luffy and Nami, while all this is happening, are about to get help from someone they had not expected at all. Alright, so differences. So despite the fact that there's only 2 chapters being covered across 3 episodes, there aren't as many big differences. It's just the differences that they did add were extensive. So episode 816 has a couple filler scenes added. The first is there's a scene where Pudding finds a wounded Reiju. And in the manga, after seeing Reiju injured in the last chapter/episode, we don't know what happens to her until we see it from Sanji's perspective, discovering that Reiju is in Pudding's room. But the anime opts to show us all of this. The other scene is the scene directly after this, where Brook confronts Big Mom after being caught in the treasure room, and Big Mom calls upon her main homies Zeus, Prometheus, and Napoleon. This filler scene kind of serves as a setup to the actual canon scene from the manga, which we won't see until the next episode, but even that has filler as well, as we'll get into. There's also a minor flashback of Pedro's original journey to Whole Cake Island, and this is extended greatly in the anime. In the manga, you only have 2 tiny panels showing Pedro and Zeppo running into Pecoms when they first arrive at Whole Cake Island, but in the anime, it just shows their entire journey, getting to the point where we actually do see the fateful moment where Pedro loses his eye and everything. Now, in episode 818, the anime shows the entirety of the Big Mom versus Brook fight, whereas the manga only shows basically the latter half of the fight. After a lot of the battle has already taken place. The manga only shows their conversation once the room is already on fire, where they discuss the fact that Brook seems to be prioritizing the poneglyph robbing over saving Sanji. And I didn't mind this addition because it shows Brook trying to use his soul solid abilities on Zeus and Prometheus and it not working, which explains why in the manga he never tried it. It also explains how Brook got that extra fracture over his right eye socket that wasn't there before. As the anime shows, he got smacked in the face with Napoleon pretty hard. And all these things happen off screen in the manga, and it was a little jarring to see, Brook all of a sudden have this new fracture on his face. So it was nice to actually see the anime explain this a bit. And this is one aspect of Whole Cake Island that does seem intentional on Oda's part, as I've kind of alluded to and commented in the past. Or I guess the Jump editors could also it was their effort to kind of rein in the length and pacing of Whole Cake Island compared to Dressrosa by off-screening many things that, we've seen so far. And of course, these all have their own pros and cons. We do get to see a little bit more context and setup to things like the Luffy versus Cracker fight, Big Mom versus Brook, and just a lot of things that seem to be happening off-screen, but the anime decides to fill in. Whole Cake Island is already a complicated enough arc as it is, and so I do see the thought process behind kind of reining in sort of the length and pacing of Whole Cake Island, because Dressrosa, it was long and it was drawn out for sure. It was a good arc. No, don't get me wrong. I loved Dressrosa, but yeah, I think Whole Cake Island, with how complex and almost kind of convoluted the story gets, it definitely needed to be reined in a little bit, but you lose some of those details and you're kind of left filling in the gaps with your own imagination or just through context clues. Anyways, let's get into the episodes themselves. So these episodes begin with Chopper, or Choniki, and Carrot running around Mirror World, hopping from random mirror to random mirror, looking for one of them that leads inside the castle, while Luffy is busy basically trying to rip his arms off to get free. It's very similar to Zoro and his approach to escape back on Little Garden, where he was willing to chop his own feet off to get free out of Mr. Three's candle. What was it? The candle wax birthday cake thing. The main event of this episode, however, is the confrontation between old rivals Pedro and Baron Tamago, and it's here we learn Pedro's bounty as being way higher than I had reasonably expected at 382 million berries. Like, good lord, that's high. To put into context, that's higher than Luffy's bounty prior to the time skip. But then again, you know, Pedro was a pirate active in the New World and had run-ins with a Yonko in the past, so I guess it's not that unreasonable that he's that strong. Tamago has an even higher and more outrageously higher bounty for what I expected at 429 million berries. Like, this guy isn't even, like, I would say one of the top commanders of the Big Mom pirates, and he seems more like just a gopher guy who just does things, you know. But he has got an extremely high bounty. 429 million berries is crazy. But to put that into perspective, that's more than 100 million berries more than Zoro's current bounty, which is sitting at 320 million. Like, that's insane. Like, Big Mom's pirate crew is just full of powerhouses. Like, you understand the separation that a Yonko crew has compared to a normal pirating crew, even one as strong as the Straw Hats. And not only is Tamago probably stronger than Pedro with their differences in bounty prices, but because of their past run-ins, Tamago has come prepared for this fight to counter Pedro's electro-infused attacks by wearing non-conductive tights. And Tamago's leg/egg attack names, I absolutely love these. The way Baron Tamago names his attacks. They are all egg-themed, but he replaces the word egg with leg since he uses kicks similar to Sanji, like Leg Benedict or Sunnyside Legs. I hate that the Sunnyside Legs is an anime-only attack, because it's such a good one, especially visually. When he spins around like a top to do that move, he actually looks like a sunny side up egg. It's so funny and inventive. Yeah, I absolutely love the way Oda comes up with his move names and just visually how funny it is. However, the more interesting bit that we were all interested in is why was Pedro here on Whole Cake Island before in the first place? And here we begin to see a bit of that as well. Pedro with both eyes still traveling with a talking bear that suspiciously looks like Beppo, who's named Zeppo, and of course Zeppo has to be related to Beppo in some way. And sure enough, in an SBS, we do learn that he is in fact Beppo's older brother. In fact, between two different SBS entries across two separate volumes, we get a short backstory for Beppo and Zeppo. So in volume 84, a fan asked what order the Heart Pirates joined Law's crew, and for Beppo, in it, Oda explains 14 years ago, Beppo left Zou in search of his older brother, who got on a ship to the North Blue and wound up on Swallow Island a year later, where he would then be bullied and picked on by Penguin and Shachi, his other two current crew members. Law would then step in to beat up the pair and save Beppo from the bullying. And from there, they would eventually become crewmates and form the Heart Pirates. Then in volume 86's SBS entry, a fan asks directly if Zeppo and Beppo are related, and if he is the brother that was referenced in the volume 84 SBS entry that I just went over. And Oda does confirm both by saying, quote, "They do resemble each other, that's correct. Pedro and the Nox expedition party who were chased by the government for searching for poneglyphs, thus they became the Nox pirates. And that's a story from about 15 years ago. Beppo loved his older brother Zeppo, and when he climbed down Zou to get a view of the sea, he was swept away. One thing led to another, and he found his way to North Blue. He then met Law. Meanwhile, the Nox pirates were wounded and had morale issues, so Peckham's led the others who couldn't continue their journey, leaving just Pedro and Zeppo. And then Peccoms and the others arrived in Big Mom's territory. There, their lives were saved and they entered her care. Pedro and Zeppo, who continued searching for poneglyphs, eventually set their sights on Big Mom's poneglyphs 5 years later. And by coincidence, Pedro and Peccoms came face to face once again. End quote. And yeah, this is where this story picks up, where they eventually are captured by Tamago and brought before Big Mom and forced to do the roulette. Unfortunately, Zeppo drew 100 years, but he only had 30 years of his life left, which means Pedro had to make up the remaining 70 years. But thanks to Peccoms begging Big Mom, she decides to reduce it by 10 years to 60. But because he took Tamago's eye, Big Mom would not accept anything less. And so, without hesitation, Pedro just rips his left eye out to buy him some more time. And this is where Pedro says something that will become a core theme for the rest of the story, as he says that the day of the dawn of the world is coming. I need to return home. And as gruesomely and epically, he just stands there with his eye, with his eyeball in his palm. And I will get into this in a second, but Big Mom, respecting this level of commitment, decides to knock another 10 years off, making it 50 years, allowing him to survive a little longer because he has a purpose. And the revelation of this dedication is an awesome moment. Pedro is asked by Tamago why he has returned to this island of nightmares, and Pedro has this almost like religious dedication to Luffy and the Straw Hats, saying that they will guide the world to a new dawn and change the world. And I feel like it was at this very moment, for me, I felt like their adventure for the One Piece went not just from like an adventure seeking treasure and, fulfilling dreams to something bigger than themselves, that you knew that they were eventually have to face the Marines and the world government, and that would inherently change the world when that happens. But hearing someone from within the story acknowledge this fact that what Luffy and the Straw Hats represent and what they're trying to do is something far greater than even what they themselves set out to do. It gives this story a whole new level of epicness. And I know I throw that word around a lot on this podcast, but I mean in the literal sense that this story's grandness and scope just became a lot bigger and grander and more of an epic. And there are people looking to and counting on the Straw Hats for some form of salvation or change in the world, like a revolution, despite the fact that there's already a revolutionary army somewhere, operating. But also the way it's phrased with the mention of a new dawn. Now that's a pretty common way of symbolically describing a new beginning. But in One Piece, it has a bit more emphasis and meaning behind it due to the emphasis of the sun symbolism and iconography laced throughout this entire story. Like if you've been paying attention, there's a lot of imagery, symbolism, and iconography of the sun laced throughout the entire series. So, for example, the very beginning of the story is called Romance Dawn. That's the name of the chapter 1. And another thing is the Arabasta national flag is a sun. The climax to Skypiea and the fight with Enel was dramatically Luffy making it sunny amongst the storm clouds using a big golden ball, which is basically like a sun. Additionally, we know in the Shandian culture, there is such a thing as the sun god that the people worship to among 3 other elemental gods that they pray to based on what we saw in Nolan's flashback from that same arc. Also, the Straw Hat's ship is called the Thousand Sunny, with a sun-shaped lion figurehead. The opposite to who we think is the main antagonist of the story, Blackbeard, possesses the darkness fruit, is the sun. So, which is a source of light that can combat the darkness. And, obviously we think Blackbeard is the final boss, or at least that's my opinion. Then we have the fish people of Fishman Island having a dream to live above the water and experience the sun, which Luffy and Jinbei promised to make that possible someday. We also learned during the Zou arc that the makers of the poneglyph and the Kozuki clan's family crest also has a sun symbol that looks suspiciously similar to Arabasta's national flag as well. Not to mention that while not directly affecting the story, many of the opening theme animations depict the Straw Hats sailing towards the sun or a sunrise, aka the dawn. So yeah, and the other thing too is the straw hat itself, when viewed top down, looks suspiciously like a yellow sun. So needless to say, the theme of the sun and the dawn is increasingly becoming more and more relevant to the story, and it's now being articulated by the characters within the story. And it's something that you should definitely keep an eye out for as you continue to go through the story, because it becomes more and more of a big theme. Now, this moment was incredibly goosebumps inducing because you really started to feel the story and the stakes growing to a level that we've yet to really see it. Pedro is ready to give his all and even his life to make sure this future is a reality. And one thing that is not clear yet is why Pedro feels this way. Why is he so dedicated to this cause? Like, where did he get this belief that Luffy is the one who will lead them to this new dawn? And I was incredibly interested to learn that, because that might give us a clue to maybe what this new dawn actually means. How does this actually manifest itself? Right now, it seems more of a dream, and we don't really know what shape that will actually take. Is it finding the One Piece? Is it taking down the world government? Is it the freedom of all, whatever it is, the defeat of Blackbeard, the revelation of what the Void Century is? Who knows? My initial reaction to this when I first read it was that perhaps Pedro met Roger when they were traveling with Nekomamushi and Inuarashi. Because they have such a close relationship to Roger, maybe he met Roger and learned something from Roger. Or perhaps he learned something from the Kozuki clan while they were also with them as well. I don't know. That is definitely a very big mystery that will maybe even give us a clue as to what the One Piece is. During all this, though, Luffy is still trying to rip his arms off to escape. And as crazy as this is, and as crazy as Luffy seems, what he's saying to Nami actually makes a lot of sense. This is a part of Luffy for his forward thinking philosophy to how he lives his life comes into play. He never gives up and rarely gives into despair, except for the one time where he lost Ace. But outside of that, he never gives up. And what he's saying here is that rather than waiting for some fantasy where they get magically saved or waiting to die as a prisoner, that he'd rather go down fighting and swinging, even if it means ripping off his arms. I did find it hilarious when Luffy demands that Nami also rip her arms off too, and she's like, "What, are you crazy?" And Luffy, the ever optimist, believes that even without his arms, he will find a way to make it out of this and beat Big Mom. Now that is the utmost optimism and confidence to an unrealistic degree, I think, but I think we all could use a little bit of that in our daily lives. Maybe not to this extreme, like I said, but the idea of rather than giving into despair or a state of helplessness due to seemingly insurmountable odds or circumstances, if the alternative is you're going to be miserable or fail or just do nothing, you might as well be miserable trying to do something, anything to get yourself to a better place, whether it's something drastic or even just a tiny step towards a positive outcome. You should take it and you should do it. I think that is something that I try to incorporate in my life, sometimes to better success than others. But yeah, it's a tough one to keep in mind, especially when things do look really dire and really hard. Luckily, I've been blessed with not having to face too many insanely hard, difficult hardships. But yeah, there have been times for sure. And it's this feeling that Sanji is currently dealing with as well. He feels like the situation he's in is so unwinnable that he's essentially resigned himself even without fighting. And seeing Luffy like this shows us, the viewer, why Sanji needs Luffy so badly. Luffy can show Sanji that you have to keep fighting for your dreams. And notice how Luffy, even in his infinite optimism and confidence, doesn't necessarily guarantee that he will come out successful, but it's that he'd rather die fighting than just die and sit there. And speaking of Sanji, he is desperately trying to make this new reality something that he views positively. But in making this bento meal for Pudding, he instinctively made all of the Straw Hat's favorite foods without even realizing it. All the items contained in the meal match up with what Oda mentioned were the favorite foods of each Straw Hat member in his SBS entry from volume 45. to the question of, what everyone's favorite foods are. In it, Oda confirms Luffy's favorite food is obviously all meats, which you can see at the top left of the bento box. The fish for Usopp is at the bottom. The spicy pasta for himself in the upper right. The sandwiches are for Robin in the center. And then the hamburgers are for Frankie in the center right. The curry rice for Brook is in the center left. Then in the basket, in the next scene, you can see him loading up alcohol for Zoro, the Mikan tangerines for Nami, and then a chocolate bar for Chopper. And I just think this moment is so sweet and sad at the same time. He clearly misses them and knows all their favorite foods and appetites so well. He makes this stuff without even thinking. Additionally, the portion size is also huge compared to what any normal person could eat because he's so used to making food for a crew that can put away a ton of food. Like, of course, Luffy puts away a ton of food, but we've seen Chopper, Usopp, and Brook eat like crazy too. And Frankie, being as big as he is, he also has a pretty big appetite. However, when he goes to deliver this incredible meal, he's turned away by this living door that's obviously a homie to Pudding's room, so he decides to go see her through the balcony. But this is where this takes a heartbreaking and tragic turn, and something that I had long been suspicious of has finally been confirmed. Sanji walks up to the balcony window and sees Pudding laughing at a seated Reiju. Then we suddenly are shown Pudding with this incredibly menacing smile with a third eye on her forehead, a la Tien, or Tenshinhan. And her, up until now, her bangs had been covering her third eye this whole time, which is incredible how no one would notice that. I, of course, immediately went into sort of an inquisitive mode wondering, is this a feature that is naturally part of her anatomy? Like, is she like some new species of people that has three eyes, similar to how like the long-limbed tribe people have long limbs, different parts of their body? But yeah, or is this like a devil fruit power that she has? But the more pressing thing about this moment is that Pudding unknowingly reveals that everything about her this entire time has been an act, and that shot of Sanji's reaction to hearing her mock Sanji's love is haunting, chilling, and devastating. It literally looks like the life has been sucked out of him, and in the anime especially, through the use of colors and lighting, they make the artistic choice to desaturate and darken him to this almost like ghoulish level. It's devastating and insanely cruel. This whole time, she's been putting on an act, and we finally learn what Pudding said to Luffy and Nami that sent him into the rage he's in right now as he continues to try and rip his arms off. In that moment, she whispers that she won't marry Sanji because at the ceremony, she's going to shoot and kill Sanji, as well as the entire Vince family, and eventually the Straw Hats as well. This took such a sinister turn, even more than I was expecting. Like, I was suspicious, but this is crazy. Seeing this sweet and innocent Pudding making these faces and talking like this was, like, it was actually unsettling, and it really doesn't have anything to do with her third eye. She, like, just her behavior. And even to me, as someone who was sus of Pudding from the get-go, this was quite the change in demeanor. She is every bit her mother's daughter, but there is still something that kind of nags at you, because, like, even in this moment, she's acting all evil. It's like, what's weird is how close she was with the good-natured and kind Lola. Also, how fondly she seems to remember Lola, too. That was clearly not a lie, as she had no one around to perform to, so it doesn't seem like that she's, like, completely devoid of, like, sentiment. But yeah, there are definitely a few more unexplored layers to this character than just being this evil and cruel person, because why would Oda show her reacting like that to Lola when everyone else seems to hate Lola, especially her mom, Big Mom? For now, though, Sanji is really going through it, as you can imagine what must be going through his mind. The only salvation he thought he had was being with and making Pudding happy, but instead all that was a lie, and that he basically has doomed everyone for pretty much nothing. It's pretty devastating. You just feel so terrible for Sanji. One of the kindest people ever is just being mercilessly mocked behind his back, and he has to listen to all of this. And I thought for sure that Sanji would hear this and basically kind of like snap himself out of this and light his cigarette and start fighting back from here on out. But what actually happens is quite the opposite, in one of the more heartbreaking moments of the arc and series. Instead of the usual strong and resilient Sanji, we see sort of a weak and broken Sanji in tears as he continues to try and fight back those tears and light his cigarette in the rain and fail at both. It's not the rain that's putting out the lighter, it's actually his tears. And this is honestly one of the worst things that a person can experience. Sanji grew up being told and believing he was a worthless failure of a human being, eventually leading to being disowned and abandoned by his family. He is constantly trying to prove his worth to everyone, but as we've discussed already, Sanji has a very low valuation of his own life, to the point he's always willing to sacrifice it despite his big heart, amazing cooking abilities, absurdly strong fighting abilities, among many other great qualities that so many people love about Sanji. In this moment though, Sanji has lost everything. His blood family, his Baratie family, his Straw Hat family, and the one person that was supposed to make all of this worth it and bearable not only thinks as lowly of him as he sees himself, but actually mocks him mercilessly for all those same flaws. This would be like if your significant other or best friend basically has been lying to you just to keep you around for superficial benefits, but secretly not only believes every flaw you're insecure about, but openly uses them to mock you in front of other people. Just an absolute piece of scum. And I hated Pudding at this moment so much. Like, how could she do this to Sanji? Like, Oda is just too good at creating such hateable villains. Like, I wanted Pudding to get the most massive comeuppance ever, more so than Big Mom. Like, Pudding, oh my god. Like, this moment, you just really want to hope that somehow Pudding gets put in her place. But yeah, we'll have to wait on that. Pudding goes on to explain that not only have they planned all this, but have developed weaponry that can get through the tough defenses of the Vinsmokes, which is how Reiju was shot in the first place. Weirdly, she's just sitting there in place and not fighting back at all. Even if she was experiencing serious blood loss, you'd think she'd still fight back a little bit. Mostly, I think it has to do with Nitro sitting on her, kind of immobilizing her somehow, but this is where Pudding reveals yet another surprising aspect to her. She does in fact have a devil fruit power, as she unsettlingly plunges her hand into Reiju's head and digs out her memory in the form of a strip of film with the memo no mi, or the memo fruit, which allows her to view and manipulate a person's memory like editing a film strip in movies. She can even alter someone's memories by recutting them with different memories and putting them back in. Like, this is an incredible ability for Big Mom to have at her disposal, because essentially Pudding is a walking, flawless lie detector and interrogator. Like, she can gain information out of anyone without even really having to ask them any questions. At least we think. We don't know the sort of the limits or the conditions that need to be met to be able for her to do this, but yeah, it seems pretty ubiquitous. Although at least we get to go from an absolute gut punch of a scene and depressing moment to an absolute badass moment where we see Brook face down Big Mom, of all people. And if I had to place bets on who the first Straw Hat to face a Yonko would be, Brook would not have been my top choice, but he doesn't feel all that out of place here. The moment where Brook stands back up after taking a beating from Zeus, Prometheus, and Napoleon is such an amazing Brook moment that we've been waiting for. Like, everything about Brook's monologue here is so freaking awesome. I especially love that Brook truly understands Sanji's kindness and commitment so well, despite not really having spent that much time together, because if you really condense the timeline of One Piece down, they've really only been together for about a few months, really, especially Brook and the rest of the crew, because he's the newest member. And they spent all that time apart during the 2-year time skip, and only now have reunited since Fishman Island. So yeah, it's not that much time, but he feels this way because if you remember back on Thriller Bark, he was one of 2 Straw Hats, him and Robin, that knew of both Zoro and Sanji's sacrifice, but Brook was the only one who secretly witnessed it firsthand, the lengths both Sanji and Zoro were willing to go to protect Luffy, while Robin only overheard about it after the fact. Brook understands the assignment of this mission, as when Big Mom questions him, so the only reason he's going after the poneglyphs is because he's got nothing better to do. But this is where the depth of Brook's kindness really surprised me, at least at the time. He wasn't just doing it for the mission of getting valuable intel. He felt he needed to succeed in completing this aspect of the mission because just in case the worst case scenario happened of Sanji not choosing to return occurred, they can wish Sanji happiness in his new life and not have him feel burdened by the fact that he may have just wasted his Nakama's time and resources and maybe their lives. And they can tell him that they got the poneglyph rubbing and still wish him well, and especially if it's by choice to stay with Big Mom's crew. And this is such an incredible moment that reveals a lot about both Sanji and Brook. This is when I realized that Brook is someone that almost lives to serve others. The way he talks about his acts and how he acts around the other Straw Hats, like he's indebted to them. And the way he's indebted to them is very interesting because while he does view them like a family, it's almost like a protective butler or a knight of a royal family, almost like Alfred from Batman. Like, Alfred is absolutely considered family by Bruce, but at the same time, Alfred is also incredibly protective in a very different way than, say, like Dick Grayson or Barbara Gordon, who are also very much part of the Bat family, as it were. But they are treated and they act differently to Alfred. And I feel like Brook is kind of the Alfred of the Straw Hats. And it makes sense. He is by far the oldest and also kind of dresses like a butler too. I think that's where the sense that I get from anyways. Brook then finishes this epic scene off with a banger. As Big Mom mocks him, the worst case scenario isn't that they won't get Sanji, it's that they'll all die. And Brook just defiantly responds, "What kind of idiot draws up a plan with the expectation they might die?" And that's so freaking true. It goes back to the idea of belief and confidence. If you go into a situation thinking you might lose, you've already lost half the battle. Like, contingencies are always good to have in a plan, but no plan should ever be based on the idea that you're going to fail. And I also love the fact that because Brook is insanely old, and even older than Big Mom, who's in her mid to late 60s by this point, calls her Ojo-san, or young lady, which is kind of condescending and childish to call someone of Big Mom's reputation, age, and stature, while also at the same time sounding respectful at the same time. It's like almost like a backhanded compliment. It's pretty funny how he does that. But during all this, our current best hope, the Choniki and Carrot group, have finally woken up Brule by tickling her, and she finally gives up how to actually find the right mirrors, and she basically states that all you need to do is just ask them. But when they ask them, I love that they instinctively know to address the mirrors using the classic fairy tale phrasing of "mirror, mirror on the wall," an obvious reference to Snow White's evil queen asking "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And sure enough, they all start replying, but none of the mirrors know who any of the Straw Hats are, so Carrot offers to draw portraits. And when this scene leaves on that note, without revealing what her portraits look like, I kind of figure that she's going to be doing some really bad drawings, but we don't get to see them just yet because pretty much all the good guys are terrible at drawing. I mean, we obviously have the Mr. 13 just drawing incredible portraits, but since then, outside of Usopp, no one can draw. The last scene of these episodes end on a very chaotic but incredible note, where Luffy is starting to draw blood as he's getting close to ripping his arms off. Also, can we just talk about how durable Luffy's ability to stretch is? Like, Luffy himself is pretty strong, so like he's using his own strength to try and rip his arms off, yet his Gomu Gomu powers do not allow him to rip, and he can stretch quite a ways, it seems like. So yeah, that's something that's very interesting. Like, the fruit itself is incredibly durable, not just Luffy's sort of physical gifts that he has, even despite his powers. But anyways, during this, Nami is screaming for him to stop because of how disturbing it would be to see someone rip their arms off in front of you, while Opera threatens to torture Nami with a crossbow gun for Lola's current location, and Nami is just screaming for both of them to stop. And I love that there's a little tiny moment where this is presented as a choice. Either Luffy rips his arms off and escapes, or she gets shot and she of course wants neither. But there's a funny moment where Luffy and Opera agree that Nami is being unreasonably selfish here, trying to have it both ways. Although when you sit there and think about it, like, how would Nami even know the whereabouts of Lola at this moment anyways? Like, it's been 2 years, and the last time she saw Lola was on Thriller Bark. Mind you, a mysteriously moving island shrouded by a very thick fog in the Florian Triangle, belonging to the crew of a Shichibukai who broke up after that moment. And then Lola herself left shortly after they did as well from that same island. Heck, we the viewers who are more omniscient than anybody don't know where she is at the moment. The only piece of additional info that we have, that she was on Water 7 sometime after the time skip. And yeah, even then, we don't know if she stayed there, if that was just a stop, because she is a pirate, so she's not going to, like, you know, set down anchor for an extended period of time at some port. I guess Shanks did at the very beginning, but, you know. Anyways, like, Nami could easily tell the truth of the last time they saw her was on Thriller Bark, on an island called Thriller Bark, and still not really let Big Mom know anything about where Lola actually is. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate Nami's sort of loyalty and friendship to Lola to not give them any intel on where she could potentially be, because at least then that would almost kind of relegate it to searching in the Paradise half of the Grand Line, and so that definitely narrows the scope a little bit more, for sure. Putting that aside, though, amongst the chaos and the dire pinch that Luffy is in, who is about to rip off his arms, and Nami being skewered by an arrow, a very familiar voice comes through the door, and it is Jinbei. He casually strolls in and just blasts Opera in the gut with a Gosen Maigawara Seiken, or the 5,000 brick fist. And oh my god, the novelty of having a former Shichibukai in the Straw Hats still has not worn off, because having another absurdly strong member of the crew is just amazing. And I'll be honest, when I was first reading through this as it was being released, I completely forgot Jinbei was here. And so when this chapter dropped, I was so insanely hyped, but also it felt incredibly stupid because it should have been obvious who was going to come save them. But of course, when we see Jinbei, our immediate reaction is to look closely at his body to make sure he's got all his limbs. But it looks like they're all intact, so now really the only possible danger is that he may have lost some of his lifespan. Or maybe he even got out of that roulette thing entirely somehow. Who knows? We'll have to wait to see for that. But yeah, things are finally starting to turn around in our hero's favor. Jinbei is reunited with his crew and rescues Nami and Nami and Luffy. Choniki and Carrot can harness the mirror world to find and connect everyone. And as heartbreaking as it was, Sanji knows the truth now and can now maybe begin to fight to free himself and not work against Luffy. Brook and Pedro are still in trouble though, but they look like they still have fight in them, so we'll hope that they come out victorious, or at least find ways to escape. But yeah, we will have to wait to see what happens in the next set of episodes. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. I really like those. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes, or see some pictures of my manga collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Stay safe out there, no spoiler section, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!